Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I'm going to talk about a new IEM from a company called CrinEar. Yes, Crin as in critical, and this isn't a Crin collab, it's not Johnson and Crin. Crin is the only Johnson swinging with this IEM. Now this IEM is sold exclusively through Crin's store. It's hangout.audio. I will have a link in the description below, and that sale went live at the same time this review is going live. So it's a limited run. I know there are 500 units planned on being made, and there could be more later, but not like mass production, high volume. So if this is an IEM that kind of piques your interest, well then I would consider purchasing it as soon as possible. It's not a sales technique or tactic here. I still will be talking about this IEM in depth in this review, but I just wanted to let you know of the urgency on timing in case you were thinking about it. So let's start with the basics so I can save you time. So what comes in the box? Well, obviously you get this nice little Meta black box, and there's a Pelican case inside, which mine had a little bit of moisture in it, I believe, or I don't know, maybe it was the Singaporean Air that had the manual kind of stuck to the top. My dry desert air kind of dried this out, so it's not like as tacky feeling as when I first opened it. I think I can get that off with some Goo Gone. But it's a nice case. It has a little foam insert inside, which the cable's packaged in here quite nicely, and then the IEMs are presented up top when you first open it. And I love the zipper idea with this little Velcro attachment, so you can put other accessories in there, tips, etc. You also get a total of 6 pairs of tips. There are 3 sets of foam. Obviously 2 are missing because I've been testing them. So you get 3 different sizes, and the same thing happens with the silicone tips. I'll talk about size and fitment in a minute. So just to let you know, I prefer the comfort of the silicone tips with this only because I have like a skin reaction to foam, but the base delivery with the foam tips was great. I actually like the tuning just a little bit better with the foam tips. So I would experiment. Obviously your own body composition is going to be different, as is ear shape. And on that note, just anytime I can talk about this, your ear canal openings might not be the same from left to right. So experiment with different tip sizes. This is a bassy IEM. If you feel like there's not enough bass, or it sounds like really weird or wonky sounding and lacks any kind of oomph to it, there's a really good chance you have a bad seal. IEMs are critically dependent on having a good seal. So experiment with different tips, maybe do a different size and left to right, kind of see what delivers the best possible results. It doesn't feel loose and doesn't feel too pressured in your ear. So I'm gonna detach the IEM. This uses a standard 2-pin, hooray for that. The cable itself, I love. I like this look. And I really like that the IEM itself kind of tied into the same look, you know, with the whole copper, almost like a rose gold look. But it's nice because it doesn't like go too hard in one particular direction. The IEM itself is a really clean look. The only slight criticism I have of the cable itself, the length is not the longest cable. I actually think it's just right if you're using it at a desk or with a DAP. But because you have a swappable termination on the end, this whole plug itself, the total length is quite long. Just to put it in perspective, I still think this is somewhat of a chunky IEM cable. This is the High Senior Mega 5 EST, and you could see a difference on the termination length. I'm just gonna lay it on the table and try to line it up. So it sticks out a little bit longer, not a big deal, but if you tend to put a DAP in your pocket, that's just something to be aware of. Obviously be careful of terminations anyway. Now the IEM itself, the shape of it is nice. It's smaller. It's not a big chunky IEM like the Dusk that came out last year that I reviewed. That is a good IEM, but one of the biggest issues with the Dusk is it's a chunky IEM. I mean, it has some big heft to it, and the size doesn't always work for everybody. I am pleased to say that the Meta is a little bit more compact. It has a 5.1 millimeter bore and a 5.8 millimeter nozzle, so this does adapt well to a lot of different ears. Now, if you have large ear canals, well, that's where you have to kind of spend more time playing around with tips. Personally, both sets of tips that come in the box, both the silicone and the foam, they didn't work perfectly for my ear. My clutch ear tip is the Dunu S&S tips, just because anytime I'm having issue with a seal or a consistency, like if I want the bass delivery of foam but still have to use silicone, that's kind of been a go-to tip. You can experiment with that. Maybe you're experienced in IEM tip rolling and you have some preferences. So I don't mind. This is normal. It's not like there's something wrong with it, but the tips that came in the box didn't quite work perfectly for me. Now, I didn't disclose the driver configuration on this because Crin didn't, and I have no idea exactly how it's built inside. I'm not like in full agreement of that, but at the same time, knowing the driver configuration doesn't like guarantee it's going to sound like anything. It's just knowing what's inside it. So my guess, based off impedance measurements and the way it behaves, is I think it's a single dynamic driver on the bass side just because it has really good dynamic punchy bass, and it's small enough where I don't think there's like an isobaric dual driver bass arrangement inside. I think it uses BAs for mids and maybe treble. And I also think it's using some kind of EST or piezo tweeter or maybe some combination of different tweeters to handle the higher frequencies. Partly because if you use an impedance adapter, now this did not come with an impedance adapter. I used a 10 ohm impedance adapter that came with the CrinEar Reds, also a collab with CrinEar a while back. And it boosted bass a little bit, not much, but it also boosted some of the treble. So that usually suggests that there's 3 different drivers or more that have variance in impedance, and that's why it behaves differently if your output impedance changes. Now my measurements uses an IEC 711 coupler clone, and I don't use a pinna simulation for IEM measurements. I go straight to the coupler. It's fine for comparing against other measurements I've done, but please don't use my measurements to compare against someone else's measurements because they don't have my rig, they may not test the same way. Some of them will be using an ear simulator like a Gross or BK5128, and because of all that, you can't always compare apples to apples. Hopefully I've measured an IEM that you're familiar with so you can compare how it sounds to this. I'll have a link in the description below for that. Now having said all that, this is a bassy IEM, and I'm talking like deep thumpy bass. It rolls off, so it's not carrying like into 200 plus hertz where it sounds like warm and thick sounding. It still sounds kind of clean and lean, if you will, but damn, when the deep bass happens, it is like crazy strong. And it's kind of funny because after you start listening to it for a while, you start getting familiar with the bass, and you know you're going to expect deep bass on certain tracks, yet it still surprises you how good the bass is. It's not just amplitude. Dynamic punch and impact of bass is such an important thing that's not always shown in frequency response, and this is where this IEM really shines to me. I think the bass delivery is fantastic. The mid-range performance is quite good. It's relatively linear, and I don't have any like weird coloration where it doesn't sound natural to me. A lot of instruments sound the way they should. The vocals themselves have kind of a dry, clean, crispy presentation, almost like a Sauvignon Blanc, if I were to compare it to a wine. But what happens is if you have songs that weren't mixed well and they sound like dry in the first place or they lack any real body to it, the meta is not going to do that any favors. It doesn't have like a warm, full-bodied presentation in the vocal range. It's a little bit more clinical, neutral sound. And because of that, if you have a poorly mixed track, well, it's not going to do that any favors. Some IEM tunings out there have more body in the mid-range, which can sound a little thick and bloated with certain tracks. But for poorly recorded music, I think it helps kind of compensate for some of those tracks that you might be listening to. This one doesn't. It's not really a fault of the meta, but that does stand out depending on what you're listening to. Thankfully, when I've listened to more of my reference like audiophile testing stuff, it sounds fantastic. And I only had a couple tracks where I found that I wanted a little bit more warmth to it, but that just comes down to personal preference. I think the biggest standout to this particular IEM is the bass delivery is really strong and the treble has some zing to it. So if you want metallic instruments or music in general to have kind of more of a sparkly, brighter finish, this isn't sibilant. It's not so overly done where it's punishing, but there's definitely a little bit more brightness to it than I get with the Mega 5 EST or I get with some other more Harman-tuned IEMs. So keep that in mind. I don't think it's as punishing as some IEMs out there that follow Harman but go like Harman bright. Like I would rather listen to this than the CrinEar Nova. I think the mid-range presentation really helps in that regard, and when you couple that with the bass, it's pretty insane. I wasn't as crazy about this tuning for some of my like cheaper sounding EDM music. If you listen to a lot of techno or trance music or some kind of vocal heavy EDM, well, this one it really showcases that more of that V shape where the vocals are kind of thin and light, and then you have a really bright sparkly treble and thumpy bass. It sounded great for things like Tin Pan Alley from Stevie Ray Vaughan, when I'm listening to Depeche Mode, like really different genres. And for quartets, string instruments, classical music, these were awesome for that. I had no issues with it whatsoever, and guitars still sounded really natural. Everything sounds natural, it's just the mid-range is like clean and crisp, but pulled back just slightly because the bass is so strong. Now some of that does translate into gaming as well. I did do some gaming on this, but just to be blunt, this is a better immersive gaming IEM. I don't think it's the most competitive IEM out there in terms of FPS. Imaging performance is great. Sound quality is great. It's really thumpy, and like Even the rotor blades of a helicopter, when I was like parachuting down, that had really strong bass to it. I usually don't have IEMs that have kind of a thumpy sound from a helicopter blade. But what happens is when it's tuned this way, it almost like over embellishes some of the ambient stuff that makes the environment more immersive, which will put the footstep positional accuracy kind of at the expense of that. It's not terrible. I was still super competitive with this. It still beats pretty much most, I'd say like 90% of gaming headsets out there when it comes to FPS performance or even headphones. It's excellent, but I have experienced IEMs even for slightly less money that I felt more competitive with. I've talked about the SimGot EM6L, even the Zigot and Fresh Reviews Airte. That one's tuned a little bit better for things like Call of Duty and Apex Legends. So there are good options out there. You could still be super competitive with this. So if you just want one IEM and you like the immersive bass and that sparkly presentation, or you're okay with doing some EQ, you'll be really happy with it. And I am pleased to say that the long-term listening of this was very comfortable as well, thanks to the smaller shell. This does fit my ear quite well. I had no issues. I was a little nervous when you look at the shape of this. This little part that protrudes out can kind of be hit and miss for some people. It fits perfectly in my ear. It's not a big IEM, it doesn't stick out too far, and I don't think this is going to cause a lot of comfort issues for people either. And that about wraps up the review. Huge thanks to Crin for sending this over. It's exciting that another reviewer has gone so far into this hobby to have his own store and IEM brand. I expect more to come down the road with other models and projects, but this is a really good start. So obviously, because this was sent to me for review, I have no monetary kickbacks with this. There's no affiliate links. It's just straight to hangout.audio. And that's basically it. I really hope you found this review helpful. I try to be as honest and truthful as I can, because if I ever meet you in person one day, I go to a lot of audio shows, I'd like you to know that I'm a genuine person. So I don't think this IEM is going to be for everybody. I think the really strong bass and slightly zingy treble could be a turnoff for some, but this is a really competent entry in this price range. It's probably the best bass quality I've heard at $250. It just might not be the mid-range and treble tuning that's going to work perfectly for everyone out there. Resolution's great, comfort's great, so I think overall it's a pretty solid product to be coming out in this space, which is highly competitive, and that says a lot. With that being said, thank you so much for watching this and making it to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe so I can see you at the next one. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.